Little Masego Kgomo left home to play with friends. 8 days later, her body was found in dense bushes behind the Soshanguve railway station.
This man is a danger to our children, is a danger to our community.
The post-mortem revealed that some of her body parts were missing. For Masego's mother, the horrifying details were just too much.
Up to so far we are here today, but I say they must keep on.
Hi guys, and welcome to Crime After Crime, a segment on my channel where I talk about true crime cases, cults, and many more dark truths in this sick and twisted world that we live in. If you happen to be new here, I have a multitude of other videos that might interest you, from true crime to TV commentary, but since you happen to click on a true crime video, I will link up a true crime playlist here in case you want to check it out and stick around for longer. I try to discuss these true crime cases every Wednesdays, or as many Wednesdays as possible, but you're probably seeing this video either on Friday or Saturday because these last 2 weeks have been extremely hectic for me with work, you know, YouTube, and also I happen to have moved from my old place to a new place, so everything is just a little bit all over the place. So I apologize if I am going to be a little bit inconsistent over the next 2 weeks, but I'm not gonna bore you or bother you guys with the details of my life, so let's just get into today's video. Today I'll be talking about the horrific murder of 10-year-old Masego Kgomo, but before I get into the details of the case, I'd like to give a warning and a disclaimer that this video is intended for mature audiences only. This case involves the murder of a child, and there'll be graphic descriptions of the victim's injuries and the crime scene. Again, this case involves the murder of a child, so if that is something that triggers you, please click out of this video and take care of yourself. Viewer discretion is advised. And just to make yet another disclaimer, all the information that I'll be relaying in this video were gathered on the internet and simply compiled into one video. Please do not take any action in reliance to whatever information you hear in this case, and please remember to stay kind in the comment section. And with that being said, let's get into the case. So Masego Kgomo was born in 1999 to mom Kate Kgomo and dad Joseph Kgomo, and together she grew and lived with the rest of her family in Soshanguve, which is a township in North Pretoria, which is in Gauteng, South Africa. In 2009, she was a grade 5 student at Disappearance primary school, and I really apologize, you guys. I tried to find as much information as possible about Masego's background, her upbringing, her life, her family, and everything else. But this is unfortunately one of those cases where there's not that much information on that. So like I said, in 2009 she was a grade 5 pupil at Disappearance primary school, and December of 2009 marked the end of the school year. Masego had passed her grade 5 and she was going to be a grade 6 student the following year, which I imagine is an exciting thing because I remember being a child myself around these times, and it was always exciting to just, you know, successfully complete the grade and go on to the next grade with all of your friends. So I imagine she was excited and looking forward to going back to school and proceeding with her grade 6. Unfortunately though, she would not live long enough to see this through. So December in South Africa is warm. It is summertime. Everybody is enjoying the summertime, and on top of that, it's the festive season, so the streets are always packed, from children to adults. Everybody's always in the streets just celebrating something, celebrating the mere fact that it is a festive season. You could find people celebrating on a Wednesday, Friday, Monday, it doesn't matter. People are usually very jolly in December, which I imagine is just because, you know, it's the end of the year and Christmas is coming up, New Year's coming up, so people are just always happier for some reason in December, in my opinion, or from what I've observed in the townships that I have lived in. On the 31st of December 2009, Masego, like most of the children her age, was excited. It was New Year's Eve. In the morning, she told her mom, Kate, that she was going to play with some of her friends down the road, and off she went. She was wearing an orange vest, black leggings, plastic jelly tot sandals, and also had a braid in her hair when she went to play with her friends, who have been listed just as K, D, T, and G, along with others as well. When Masego didn't come back home around lunchtime, Kate sent her son to go look for Masego down the road where she was supposed to be playing, but her son didn't find Masego. So Kate just figured Masego probably just wandered off with some of her other friends, but she thought that Masego would be back in no time. But then later that afternoon, when Masego still wasn't there, Kate took it upon herself to walk down the road to her friend's house to look for Masego. But when she got there, she was told that a man named Brian Mangwale had sent Masego to the shops to go buy him a cold drink. Brian was a member of the community and also lived nearby, so with this information, Kate then went over to Brian's home to look for Masego, and when she got there, she was told, well, Brian admitted that he did indeed give Masego some money and send her to the shops to buy him a cold drink, but he hadn't seen her since then. At this point, panic was setting in because Kate couldn't find her daughter, and so Brian, his family, some of the other neighbors as well, assisted Kate in looking for her daughter, but unfortunately this search yielded no results. So at this point, they had been searching for quite some time and they were not finding Masego anywhere. So that's when Kate decided that it would be best for her to head over to the police station to open a missing persons case. So some sources say that Kate went to the police station the very same day, so on the 31st of December, but some sources also say that she went the next morning. So I'm unsure of the timeline, but between the 31st and the 1st was when Kate actually went to the police station to open a missing persons case, and she was actually accompanied by Brian to go open this missing persons case, missing child's case. Very unfortunately though, the days turned to nights and nights into a whole week, and while the search for Masego continued, there were no sightings of the little girl. Her family, however, kept on hoping that whoever had taken her hadn't harmed her. They held on to that hope that Masego would be returned and that when she is found, she'll be found alive. But while they were hopeful for this, they just didn't understand why whoever had taken her had taken her, and also they hadn't received any ransom call or anybody, you know, wanting something from them. So Kate was very confused as to why whoever had taken her daughter was not calling them to tell them what they want in order for them to return her daughter. Unfortunately though, despite them holding on to the hope that Masego would be found alive, that would not be the case. While the search for Masego continued, some people came forward to share what they had witnessed or who they had seen Masego with, at what time, where, just so that police could try to piece together those, you know, pieces of information and kind of track her or trace her steps, I guess you could say, while looking for her. And during this investigation, that's when it came out that some people had actually seen Masego with four people, with four, I would say, young adults, teenage men, teenage boys and young adults, four of them in the evening of the 31st, or on the evening of the 31st of December. From these witness testimonies, police ended up arresting 6 suspects in total, but I'll get into that a little bit later. However, one of the suspects ended up confessing, and so for now I want to give you guys just the timeline of events that has been put together or pieced together from these witness statements, as well as one of the suspect's numerous confessions. So Masego had been out playing with her friends when the children were approached by Brian Mangwale, and Brian sent Masego to go buy him a cold drink. So at this point, Masego left the group and headed over to the shops. A minor child labeled as just O then saw Masego at Banji's place where she was buying a bunny chow, and Brian Mangwale was also there at Banji's place. Brian then asked O to go buy him 6 rand worth of airtime and then instructed him to give that airtime to someone called Zoro Zoro. And I'm just wondering how lazy Brian is for him to keep sending other people's kids this much. But knowing what we know now, of course, it is evident and it is clear that maybe he just didn't want other kids around Masego because he was trying to lure her away. Anyway, O then asked Masego to accompany him to, you know, the shop and also to Zoro Zoro, but Masego couldn't go with him because she was still waiting for her bunny chow. And so somebody else, one of Masego's other friends named D, then decided that, you know, to accompany O to Zoro Zoro, as they both knew who Zoro Zoro was. So at this point, O and D had left Masego and Brian behind at Banji's place, and that was the last time, unfortunately, that Masego was seen alive. However, some people later claimed that they had seen a man named Albert Nono Mathebula with a child who was dressed in similar clothing that Masego went missing, Masego was wearing when she went missing. However, Albert later denied. Not only the police were searching for Masego, but the entire community of Soshanguve was searching for Masego for an entire 8 days to no avail. On the 8th of January 2010, so at this point Masego had been missing for 8 days, or 9 days actually. Brian then told the police that he would take them to a woman who knew where Masego was. However, while in the car on the way to this woman, Brian then changed the story and said that he could just show them where the body of Masego was. He then took them to Soshanguve station, and behind some overgrown bushes, Masego's body was indeed found, and Brian Mangwale was placed under arrest that very same day. When Masego's body was found, she was partially decomposed and she had unfortunately been mutilated, and unfortunately some of her organs are still missing to this day. Kate and Joseph and another family member were called into the police station to identify Masego the following day, which they did. However, Kate later said that it was very hard for her to look at her daughter like that, and so she kind of identified her using her shoes and her clothes. But I imagine it's a difficult sight for any parent to see, so I truly understand how difficult this must have been for the rest of the family, for the entire family. So Brian was arrested on the 8th of January, and later that day Superintendent Kgomo took a warning statement from him, which is basically a written statement that's made by the accused after their arrest and after they have been read their rights and cautioned and all that. And obviously the warning statement, similar to a confession, must also be voluntary, and the same kind of rules apply to a written statement as well. But before we get into the details of this warning statement and the rest of Brian's confessions and everything else, I did mention that 6 people in total had been arrested. So we have 29-year-old Brian Mangwale, and then there's also 26-year-old Albert Nono Mathebula, 19-year-old Joseph Lekhabutla, another unnamed 19-year-old boy, an unnamed 14-year-old boy, and an unnamed Sangoma, or traditional healer, who I believe is the Jan. So I believe is the person that has been named Jan in various other statements that are to come. The 19-year-old boy, who is unnamed, was actually cleared of these allegations. However, police had to keep him in custody for his own safety, which honestly, as you can imagine, was probably the best, because as you can imagine, the community was enraged. This was the murder, and it was a horrific murder of a little child, so the community was enraged. And a lot of times when the community is enraged, things can very quickly go out of hand, with people taking justice into their own hands. So I imagine that is why they kept the unnamed 19-year-old boy behind bars. The other 4 people were also later released because there was just no evidence linking them to this crime apart from witness testimonies and Brian's own confessions, which were quite inconsistent. So yeah, there wasn't much evidence against them, and so they were let go. The case wasn't gonna stand in court, and normally the best thing to do is to let them go while police gather more information or more evidence, so that when they are finally charged and go to court, they can be tried. Because if they are tried on insufficient evidence and they are acquitted, even if police find more evidence after their acquittal, they're not going to be able to stand in front of the court under the same charges that they were acquitted for. So in most cases, the police and the state normally will just let the suspect or the accused go, so that they just gather more information or more evidence before they actually take the matter to court. While that is common cause, it's still very difficult for families to understand this and for them to accept this, because here are people who you believe killed your child, and yet they're released. You see them in the community, you see them out there living their best lives, and it's hard for you to come to terms with that. So I imagine that was the case even in this particular case where initially there were 6 suspects in total and only one of them remained behind bars and only one of them ended up going to trial. I imagine that was quite difficult for the family to accept. So in this warning statement, Brian said that he decided to take Jen's offer to get him a young girl that's younger than 12 years old and that is not sexually active, for him to harvest this girl's body parts and make Muti. So first of all, Jen is a traditional healer, otherwise known as a sangoma, or in some cases a witch doctor, and he wanted to use this child, a girl's, you know, body parts or organs to make Muti, and Muti is basically voodoo. So Muti is a blanket term that's normally used to refer to traditional medications such as herbs and all that. However, it is also commonly used to refer to voodoo or dark medicine, I guess, dark magic medicine. The concoctions that witch doctors will make are also normally referred to as Muti. So after accepting Jan's offer, he kidnapped Masego, and as someone who lived in the neighborhood, who lived in the area, he would have seen the little girl around, so maybe he knew his, you know, her age. And so he kidnapped Masego.
Judge Selewe Motley summarized how Mangwale kidnapped Kgomo and handed her over to his conspirators. He then returned to join the community search for her. That evening, he took part in the killing and dumped her body.
And the details of the kidnapping are not really public, so I don't know exactly how he went about kidnapping Masego. In this warning statement though, he doesn't really expand much on the details of the murder itself or the removal of Masego's organs. He later also averred in court that his warning statement and his confessions were all involuntary because he was either assaulted or police told him what to say. So 2 days after his arrest on the 10th of January, Brian was booked out of the cells at the Soshanguve police station at 10:50 a.m. and he came back at around 1:05 in the afternoon. He was also booked back out again that same day at around 4:40 p.m. and then he returned at around 10:05 p.m. So he claims that these slots were the times that the police used to assault him in the bushes, but this claim was not accepted as the truth in court. So in the first time slot, he was taken by police to his parents' house for the police to just kind of search the house and also for them to seize the clothes that he was wearing on the day that Masego went missing. And it had been reported by some witnesses and also by Brian himself that he had been wearing a blue coat or a blue jacket, and so police went to his home and then they searched the home a little bit and then they seized this blue jacket. And during this entire search, his mother and his siblings were home. The second booking out was for further investigations that were led by Director Mapiane. On the 11th of January, which was the following day, Brian then made a pointing out showing the police where they had dropped or dumped Masego's shoes after killing her. So I had mentioned earlier that Brian's confessions were kind of inconsistent. So in one of the confessions that he made, he said that he took his own knife and he stabbed Masego with it in the stomach, while Albert Nono Mathebula took out or removed her body parts. But then he also made another confession to Magistrate Luz where he expanded that Masego was actually raped and that Nono strangled her while he as in Brian, held her legs. He also then doubled down and said that he stabbed Masego with his own knife, and now he said that he also removed the organs, but at first he had said that Nono was the one who removed the organs. On the 15th of January, Brian then indicated to Colonel Mabaswa while visiting the cells that Brian was held in that he wanted to speak with the investigating officer. He then told the investigating officer that where Masego's body was found was not actually where she had been killed. They just dumped her body there, and also said that he could take the police to do a pointing out of where Masego was killed. This led to the pointing out that took place on the 15th of January. There was also another pointing out on that day. 3 days later, he then made another confession to Magistrate Jantjies. In this confession, he's taking part in the kidnapping, and he's part and parcel of the kidnapping, and he's also on the scene, but this time he's not the one doing the stabbing. This time he says that Jan is actually the one who did the stabbing and also removed Masego's body parts. So there's 3 confessions already, and there are inconsistencies, because in the first one he said that he stabbed the child and Nono removed the body parts. In the second one, he stabbed the child and removed the body parts, and then in the third one, he was just there taking part, but then the person who stabbed the child and removed the body parts was Jan. So it's very clear that he's not a very, I guess, trustworthy. Like, his stories are not corroborating, they're inconsistent, so he's lying about something. But nonetheless, while he did all these pointing out and also confessed to the crime 3 different times, he denied responsibility. In other words, he pleaded not guilty at trial. He said that the confessions that he gave, like I said, were involuntary, in that he was assaulted, and he also said that the police told him what to say. So that is why he said those things. So at the trial, Albert Nono Mathebula actually testified for the state. So he testified against Brian. But before we get into Nono's testimony, I think it's important to note that Brian had actually also been suspected to be responsible for the murder of another child that took place prior to Masego's murder. The 6-year-old Zitha had disappeared several years before Masego in the same area. Her body was then discovered months later in the same vicinity that Masego's body was also found. Similar to Masego, Sarah had also been discovered on her bag, almost naked, and some of her organs had also been removed. Brian was initially also charged with Sarah's murder, but at the start of the trial, the state then said that they would only proceed with Masego's case because there wasn't enough evidence linking Brian to the murder of Sarah Zitha. And also Brian claimed that at the time when the child was killed, he was in jail, so there's no way that he could have been responsible for Sarah Zitha's murder. However, in one of his confessions, he had also said that he had previously been involved in a similar murder where a child was murdered and her organs were removed, but he said that he couldn't remember when the murder took place or who the victim was. He also further went to say that he was with Jen during the murder of this child that he doesn't remember, and that Jen then paid him somewhere between 4,000 and 4,500 for his participation or his assistance with this particular murder. But like I said, the prosecution decided not to proceed with Sarah's murder because obviously there is reasonable doubt as to whether Brian is responsible for Sarah's murder or not, and so they proceeded only with Masego's trial, Masego's case. So as I had mentioned earlier, some witnesses testified that they had seen Albert Nono Mathebula with, you know, a child clothed in the same clothing or similar clothing that Masego wore when she went missing on the night of the 31st of December. But when Nono testified, he denied that he was, you know, he was seen with this child or was at those locations where these people claim to have seen him. However, he said that he was present and he witnessed how Masego was murdered. He said the murder was carried out by Brian, Jen, and one other person called Mabunda. In his testimony, he said that he had been smoking dacha with some of his friends when Brian, Jen, and another woman dressed in a sangoma's attire came through with a car, and they had a child in the car with them. He and 2 of his friends then accompanied the group to a sangoma's house somewhere in Soshanguve. Brian and him then went inside with the woman who carried the child, while 2 of his friends remained back in the car. He told the court that he and Brian were then given cold drinks, but then it seems like his had been spiked or drugged or something because it made him feel dizzy, out of control, and also made him hear voices in his head. Upon entering, he says that they found some other initiates who are also dressed in sangoma clothing or sangoma attire. He then says that the lady came in the room that they were carrying Masego and with a cloth on her or something. But then Nono points out that Masego was not crying, and to him it appeared that she had also either been fed or made to drink something that had been spiked or drugged or contained something that made this girl, you know, not scream or not cry, just, you know. At some point he says that Jen then cut her open and still Masego didn't cry or scream. He said when they cut her open, he took a look because he wanted to see how a woman looked on the inside, which is just insane. But he says that Jen proceeded, he continued with the cutting, and at this point he threw up. After this, Masego's body was put inside the boot of the car, and then him and his friends were driven and dropped off at a New Year's Eve party, and his friends asked what happened to the child, but he says that he didn't tell them because he was afraid. So that was basically the gist of Nono's testimony, and Brian showed absolutely no remorse or no emotion throughout his entire trial. And what really also kind of rubbed people the wrong way was the fact that he didn't really mention his accomplices or his co-conspirators in this trial. Nonetheless, though, on October 23rd, 2012, Brian Mangwale was found guilty on 1 count of murder and 1 count of kidnapping. He was sentenced to 6 years for the kidnapping, and he was given a life sentence for the murder. While the family was happy about this sentencing and this conviction, of course they weren't happy about the fact that the people who helped him or the people who worked with him to commit this crime are still out there. The ones that we kind of know of, and also the ones that, you know, he didn't mention, the ones that we don't know of. So they're still out there, and they could potentially still also do this to other children. And in addition to that, of course, there's still that question of where is the rest of Masego's organs. So in as much as they're happy about the sentencing, I just think it would be much better, or they would have more closure, if all the people involved had been arrested and they had also been able to recover the rest of Masego's body. In November of 2011, the Minister of Women, Children and People with Disabilities, named Miss Lulu Shimwana, I believe, actually planted a tree near where Masego's body had been found, in commemoration or in her memory. And they also decided to make that surrounding area to make a Masego Kgomo memorial park in that area in her memory, and, you know, just so her legacy lives on. After about 6 years though from his sentencing and conviction, Brian appealed his sentence and conviction. However, fortunately, praise the Lord, the appeal was dismissed and his sentence and conviction were both upheld. This case was very horrific. A 10-year-old girl lost her life in the hands of these terrible monsters, and it saddens me that some of them, if not most of them, are still roaming and loitering out there, and who knows how many more victims they have managed to get to this day. It's been over 10 years since Masego's death, and I hope her legacy lives on, and may her beautiful, beautiful soul continue resting in eternal peace. As we wrap up this video, my friends, I would like to remind you guys to please like and subscribe if you haven't, especially if you enjoyed this video, found it informative, or liked listening to it, because I know that some people listen to it while they're doing their jobs, while they're working. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, again, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you do decide to drop a comment in the comment section, please remember to be respectful, because the people that we're talking about here are real people with real feelings. This is not just a story, this is actually factual, and it happened to real people. So let's remember to please keep it as respectful as possible, and just be nice to each other in the comments. No harassment will be tolerated on this channel. But with that being said, my friends, I will see you guys next week Wednesday, hopefully, and good night.